Led by Jim Wood with Mr. Ekman. Angel, you're up here for everything. Okay, John Roberts, Darren Ackley, Jenny Resch, and Dan Smith. So come on up.
I'm going to start with John. Dave, would you like to introduce John?
I'd love to. John Roberts is a good friend, a colleague. John is one of the principals at TIP Strategies, which is our strategic economic development planning partner, and he's happy to help introduce some of the work that we've done with him. Fantastic human being, on the edge of what communities throughout the country need to be doing to compete in this global economy. So with that,
great. So John, I'd like to start with you because obviously you've done work in Marathon County and actually in some other counties in Wisconsin and around the country. Clearly, if we're going to do rural resurgence, we're talking fundamentally about more people, we are talking about economic diversification, and we're talking about the essential phenomenon of strong communities and able to do both of those things. Okay? And I'd be interested if you could start us with, when you came to look at Marathon County, you've just heard folks talk about what they think they need to be protecting and projecting and how to move forward. What did you see when you got here?
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this. I'm always excited to be involved with things in Wisconsin and in Wausau and Marathon County in particular, and I want to thank Dave for our friendship and for giving me a sense of the community that goes beyond the superficial. But before I answer your question, if I may, I'd like to conclude with something, and I'll say it again, and that is, is there a secret ingredient to success for diversification for rural communities? And I will get to your question, but I wanted to say that first. Is there such a thing? Is there? And the answer is yes, there is. And in a nutshell, it's to be outward facing. To be outward facing. And I'm going to end with that same observation, but I'm going to get there in a roundabout way. And I'll start by answering your question. What did I see? What did we see? Others from the TIP team when we first came to Wausau, and some of that you've already communicated. And it made a big impression on some of the younger people on our team as well. And that is that there's something there. There is a sense of community. There is a downtown with a skeleton, the bones of a community, without which it's very difficult for a rural or even a non-urban community to be able to thrive. The river made an immediate impression on us. And the more we discovered about the river, the more vital it became to how you think about it. I spent my formative years in economic development in Oregon, and I'll make some more mention of Oregon shortly. But it took a very long time for the smaller communities outside of Portland in the Willamette Valley along the Willamette River to realize the benefits of that river. In Salem, in Corvallis, for a long time, even in Eugene, the Willamette River was an afterthought and was not part of anybody's economic development thinking. So that changed radically. So the short answer to your question is we saw a downtown with tremendous potential, and we saw a river.
Great, thank you very much. So I want to pick up on what John said and what the first panel talked about. We heard Paul talk about the business of the future. We had Kirk talk about the importance of broadband. Jim talked about a growth market. All great. Let me lay out a premise and see what your reaction to it is. For over 50 years, the cycle has been that younger workers left rural areas. That's what they did, okay? They went away to school as education became a bigger deal. They went away to school and they didn't come back. And part of the reason I would put on the table that they didn't come back wasn't just the light brights and the wonderfulness of Chicago and Los Angeles and New York. It was that they didn't want the jobs that were here, that were looking for a different kind of employment. And when I hear Paul talk about the business of the future, and I hear Jim talk about a growth strategy, and I hear you talk about the wonders of a kayak opportunity and a Rib Mountain opportunity with the running and all the rest of it, I am intrigued with the idea that what you've figured out is that the next economic diversification is as much a diversification of the types of jobs that exist in major employment clusters, instead of just saying, oh no, we're not going to do agriculture anymore, or we're not going to do healthcare anymore, or we're not going to do finance, or we're not going to do manufacturing. You want to think about that next generation. Part of the magic is finding jobs that pay more, okay? And that next generation is jobs that pay more, requires different kind of education. So there's a whole thing going on here. And my question, and let me start with Jenny and Darren. What's your vision in terms of the technical college and the UW system campus vis-a-vis that diversification? What do you see in terms of, is there another field that we need to be looking at?
So it's a great lead-in, because I think, first of all, our students don't leave here, MTC or UW-Stevens Point. Our students are staying here for the most part. UW-Stevens Point, 95% of our students are staying here after they graduate, but to get that 5%, it is an industry diversification. I think our region has a much lower degree attainment when you look at the population compared to other regions in Wisconsin, and definitely Wisconsin is lower than our neighbors. So in order to continue to retain our students from our campuses and attract students to our programs, it's about the relationship between the UW and NTC, but UW and the business partners, to make sure that students are engaging early in the programs with industry in very innovative new ways, that they're not waiting until an internship. There's things we can be doing earlier with a more diverse industry base here. The resiliency and being able to weather economic downturns is definitely we're going to be far more capable of weathering downturns with a diverse industry makeup, because we have one in our region, right? Wisconsin Rapids, with the paper industry. You see what happens to a non-diverse town. So celebrating very innovative industry. So I can't say this is the industry that's going to save us, because that's not a thing, in my opinion. It's being able to attract a wide variety of different industry sectors and making sure that we're connecting our students to those right away when they're in high school, so they know they can come to our campus and start working in that industry right away. They don't have to wait 4 years to do so.
Let me ask a quick follow-up question. For years, the record on a system-wide basis for the campus has been roughly keeping 85% of the in-state students that come. You're doing better than that, but we are now in the midst of enrollment declines. And so 90% of 80% is different than where we wanted to be. And I'm intrigued with this concept again of it's not just, I agree 100% with Paul's statement about what do we have to protect and secure. Well, you got to, for the people who are working here and making things work, that's got to become a top priority. But in addition, then, if diversification, part of diversification is going to be new career opportunities, et cetera, then recruitment of students has got to be a slightly different exercise than you're currently engaged in. So let me ask you to comment on that.
So that's where I'll follow up on the relationship with business and industry. So we as a higher education institution can do our part in the programs and the education piece, but we need business and industry partners to work with us in very innovative different ways. We have a large population that wants to just go and work right out of high school, and that's great because business and industry partners need them right out of high school. But then how do we partner with that industry to make sure that there is professional and career development pathways, and us as an education partner to support that. And the more we can do innovative educational partnerships and pathways, the more likely we are going to attract students to the programs from outside, because it's not happening right now. So that, I think, is a tremendous opportunity for a growth initiative.
Great, thank you. Darren?
I think Central Wisconsin has a very diverse economy already. When we think about manufacturing, we think about healthcare, we think about hospitality and tourism. We have, I think, a fairly diverse economy right now. I think one of our jobs, and I completely agree with everything Jenny said, one of our jobs is to work with our local employers and our local K-12s to help show the opportunities that are already here. Kind of going to Paul's point of, supporting those people that have already committed to the community. So we do things, we work with industry, we work with the K-12s on doing things like the heavy metal bus tour, right? Getting students into the manufacturers to see what they're doing, see the high tech, the well-lit, the climate controlled, the really good environments, the well-paying jobs, having those pathways where students can start with an entry level, whether they're coming straight out of high school with no necessarily higher education, but getting those jobs. And then I think higher learning needs to be flexible and be able to offer opportunities for those students to progress. So showing those pathways within the sectors, within the businesses is important as well, so those students don't just see them as a dead-end job. They say, I'm making $15 an hour, $18 an hour, $20 an hour right out of high school, which is great, but what is it going to be in 5 years, in 10 years, when I have a family, when I want to start getting more and more toys and have more responsibilities to do? How can I see myself staying in Central Wisconsin and growing? So I think part of us as higher education is to be flexible, to be able to provide those opportunities for students, to really work with our business and industry to show the opportunities that exist in Central Wisconsin, and then support our business employers on all the great things that they're doing already and the great opportunities that exist right here.
Great. John, let me come back to you. I know that you are looking more and more these days at the role of education in terms of economic development and growth across. You just heard Jenny and Darren. Reaction, addition, comments?
Well, I think that when you're looking at those factors that both attract and retain the talent that you have, entrepreneurship needs to be a major part of that thinking. And it's been mentioned before. I think the reason it's important to the diversification discussion is that relocating industry right now is driven, maybe I'll overstate this a little bit here, driven almost entirely by available labor force. So that creates a very much a chicken and egg situation. You want to bring new industry in, you want to retain green heck, you don't want them in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and so forth. Having said that, the labor equation is not easily solved, and entrepreneurship is one of those ways that you can do both, that you can both diversify the economy through the creative talents of younger people, not just younger people, I might add, but also to begin to build a workforce so that you can attract industry to that talent base. So this is a roundabout answer to your question with education. The linkage between entrepreneurship and higher ed is well established. The need for resources of higher education institutions by entrepreneurs in terms of tech transfer, in terms of their own available workers. Many years ago, we did a talent strategy for the state of Vermont, and it was surprisingly difficult to get the state to recognize that they had a pool of people who were coming to Vermont to their higher education institutions, and that to think of them as workforce, to not assume that they would graduate and go somewhere else. And I think universities are increasingly seeing their role as one that involves the local community, that creates an entrepreneurial ecosystem. So from our experience, and I don't want to take up too much of my time on the panel, but looking at examples of where smaller communities have bucked the trend and how higher education has been part of that is a very compelling story. And to underscore that in terms of Wisconsin's historic
investment. All of you know that we have one of the most mature educational infrastructures in the United States of America. We have 13 four-year campuses and 16 technical college with 47 campuses. Okay? And if you take a look at where there has been population concentration and where the numbers are better, there's a clear correlation with those areas. I mean, part of what I think I'm hearing us say in this first go-around here is that when we think about diversification, the first thing we need to understand is economic development and prosperity is no longer a spectator sport. You can't sit on the sidelines and expect it to happen. It's everybody's job, which means that we are talking about more process engagement between the public sector and the private sector, between the educational community and the employer community, et cetera. And we're talking about not doing that as some sort of rote exercise, but as a results-oriented relationship. And if we can't figure out how to put those pieces together, we're not going to get where we want to go. I want to turn to Angel and Dave now and let you comment on what we've just been talking about in terms of where you think we're right, where you think we're wrong, what we need to be doing more of in terms of diversification.
You know, people in this region, you know, they ask, why is a chamber of commerce or chambers of commerce focusing on this bigger picture with strategic economic development? And we all are driven in our local economies. For instance, we have manufacturing, healthcare, finance, insurance, commercial. That's our driving industry sector in Greater Marathon. And that changes up and down the river. Remember, the river is very critical to the history and our future. And is shaped by the global and national economy. There's so many things we do not have control of that we have to be working, and I'll use a phrase that I have since learned. It's called networked localism. And what that means is every community has the opportunity to engage, Jim, precisely on that. It's not just one organization, it's a community working together and community by community building a stronger region, which Angel helps with. For us, talent, innovation, and placemaking goes like this. In order for us to compete and retain talent, we must build a place to attract and retain, develop talent to support our innovative companies. It's a three-legged stool. You can't have one without the other. John Roberts' point, you need to be focusing on innovation, and that's the opportunity we have not only with our post-secondary institutions, but our K-12s. Our future lives in our community. Our readily available customer are the people that live here first and foremost, and to develop that and retain that here in this community, Jim.
Right. Angel?
Yeah, I would agree with everything Dave said. From the aspect of positions, many of our youth don't know the available job opportunities. I always think of when I was younger and I thought of healthcare. I come from Adams Friendship, which is a very rural community, and I didn't know that there was marketing jobs in healthcare. I didn't know that there was other opportunities besides being a physician or a nurse, right? So how do we get to those smaller communities by including them and showing them what was happening? And today's point that if we don't focus on our K-12 and that development into tech and entrepreneurship, we're not going to attract the youth or other opportunities as well, as that's one of the driving factors in many communities is entrepreneurship and tech.
I'm going to move to a second topic. Okay? Those of you who know me will not be surprised. I am always concerned about sustainability. Sustainability for me is the premise that the revenue for what you're doing comes from what you're doing. Okay? The challenge, I believe, that a lot of us confront as we look at local economic development and statewide economic development is that the tax systems that we put in place 50 to 60 years ago no longer work. Okay? The demographics have changed, the populations have changed, the challenges have changed, and so what's happened is that there's a lack of alignment between critical public services and the revenues available to pay for them based on the tax systems that we're currently using. My hat is off to my good friend Mark O'Connell and others who have been working to change the shared revenue vision, and I'd underscore for you the importance of moving from an amount of money coming from income tax and sales tax to allowing local units of government to have access to consumer-generated payments, okay, which is essentially a piece of the sales tax. Hugely important piece. As we make these go-forward investments that we need to make, however, I'm going to argue that we need more alignment here. There is, as many of you know, a rethinking of globalism going on, okay? And the simplest way to think of that argument is that neoliberal economics came out of World War II, had total confidence in the efficiency of the market. And so we worked all the time to allow employers, the economy, to be efficient, okay? And there is a concern, a growing concern, that we weren't paying close enough attention to resiliency while we were thinking about efficiency. There's a book called Homecoming by Rana Furahar, she says, by way of example, as a result of concentration on efficiencies in markets, it is now cheaper to drink Diet Coca-Cola in Mexico than it is to drink water, okay? And you say, what that means is you didn't do the second step analysis, which says, what does that do to healthcare costs in our community, okay? And so part of this is a reawakened awareness of the importance of having a workforce, okay? And the magic in that is that when you employ people, you generate new public revenues and you generate new private revenues. And what you then want to begin to do is look at the question in terms of sustainability of how you align those. By way of example, and then I will get to a question. 2-3 years ago, Competitive Wisconsin hired Deloitte when we figured out that the real revenue streams in this tight job market weren't in bringing jobs into the state, it was in filling the jobs that were already there. At that time, in 2018, there were 62,500 open hot jobs, what they called hot jobs. Hot jobs are larger numbers and average per capita income higher than the state's average per capita income. 62,500 jobs unfilled in those categories. We had Deloitte pick 3 positions, associate degree nurse, an advanced welder, and a software engineer. Had them profile them on basis of conversations with Wisconsin employers and asked them then to run it through an in-plan model and tell us how much additional new public revenue filling one of those jobs would produce, how much additional new private revenue it would produce. Won't get into the weeds other than to tell you if you take the associate degree nurse, filling an associate degree nurse at that time with an entry level of 57.9 or something like that, you think, Jim, generated $40,000 annually in new public and private revenue, roughly $9,000 in public revenue and roughly $31,000 in additional new private revenue. Okay? I say that because when we talk about sustainability, we have to begin to figure out where those values are, okay? So that when we don't just talk about we're short workers and we're looking for a subsidy to be able to go and hire somebody, unless we do the full balance sheet, you don't know what that person working in early care and education is actually contributing to your community. So that when we talk about it has to be process and it has to be relationships and it has to be entrepreneurial, why are we working with imperfect balance sheets? Why are we not looking at what that hire brings to the marketplace? Not just so we can understand it, but so we can figure out how to capture a piece of it and so that citizens and voters can understand, Kirk, back to your concerns, there's not as much support on county boards across the state for broadband as we need in some areas, okay? And I think that's because they think, well, they don't need to be able to watch cable television, as opposed to understanding what that actually does in terms of hires and values. So with all of that as background, now let me come back to this conversation. So I said earlier, so what you were originally describing was diversification is about process, it's about relationships, Angel adds to that information and access, okay? So now let me add to that equation this question of how do we afford it, okay, in terms of where are these revenues coming from. And I'd ask you another piece of the diversification question. all of these things we want to get done, building houses, putting in broadband, fixing the bridges and roads, require skilled workers. Do we actually have the skilled workers? I mean, it's not enough to simply say, this is what we got to do. The question, Kirk, is can you get your contractors to build it on time so that your friends over in the New North section of the state can get their stuff done? So let me, I guess what I would start with is, let me begin with Angel and Dave, and then we'll come back to Jenny and Darren.
So, to get the work done, right, it's going to take everybody. And it's not affordable, meaning that it's long, hard work, immediate results. Though you would like to see them, they're not always there. So there has to be patience along with the 3 Ps: public-private partnership. Strong public-private partnership. And what does that mean? That means building a case with your partners in government, in education, in business and industry, and not-for-profits, and pulling them together, as we've done with our economic development plan and our strategic plan at the Chamber. Get them on the same page in investing in different areas. I can tell you right now, in my experience in this region, and I've seen it throughout Wisconsin in terms of me being involved with the WCCE, Wisconsin Chamber of Commerce Executives, that business and industry are at the table, government's at the table, not-for-profits are at the table. We need to align, strategically direct where our priorities are in that, where's going to be our greatest return on investment. It's going to require county monies to be involved, city monies to be involved, metropolitan communities, small village, cities, towns involved with this, rural communities. Everybody has to be at the table on it. Business and industry must be there, and they are. So that's the answer in terms of where those resources come from, Jim.
Yeah, I do. And I think, we talk about sustainability as a dollar amount, but I think what's also important is the time, right, and the dedication and the partnership. So we talk about collaborating, and then people talk about, well, there has to be money. But beyond that, there has to be time invested. We know time is more valuable than money these days because people just have so little of it. So that means getting involved in a project and staying long-term with that project, keeping informed of what's going on beyond the dollar amount. That way there's this constant communication of collaboration while there's those initiatives being built forth.
Synergy, Stephen's point, we are very regionally focused, right? I think to expand on Dave's point, yes, and it also means that Wisconsin Rapids and Merrill and Marshfield and Wausau need to get all those individuals at a table, because the more we can be informed of what other communities are doing and what other counties are doing, the more we can regionally benefit from those efforts in aligning that return on investment. So a win in Wausau, a win in Weston is a win for Wausau. A win in Rapids is a win for Marshfield. But in the conversations and the discussions that happen, I don't always hear the celebration of a region and communities getting things that maybe another community didn't. But it really is helpful to our region the more each of us can pull together from all of the communities in that.
We need to be precise with what we are looking to accomplish. I think trying to, do everything is going to not be sustainable. We're not going to be able to get it done, and it's not going to be done well and effective. So I think looking at that, what are the top priorities? What's the biggest return on investment? What's the biggest bang for our buck? I do think that central Wisconsin as a whole, the public, private, government, education, I think the partnerships that are there are strong already. Like, I believe when I started this position 14 years ago, I was surprised at how well different industries worked with each other, how competitors worked with each other to try to make central Wisconsin stronger. I think that's still definitely something that holds true today, and I think it's getting better. I think, though, the alignment piece is something that we need to do as well, which I think a program like this and what you're doing, Jim, is extremely important, looking at how do we align, how do we make that precise target, and then how do we go after it and get it done.
Well, thank you. And I think I began by saying the critical factors to be outward looking, outward facing. And this is a reminder that this is a zero-sum game in many ways. It's a little bit of a shock to hear that, but economic development is increasingly a zero-sum game. And what that means is that if you aren't outward facing, if resilience isn't part of how you think about the position of Wausau, not just in Wisconsin, but nationally, you won't easily be able to come up with strategies that will give you that resilience. And another way to say that is that communities are actively, other economic development organizations are actively recruiting your companies and your people as we speak. There are probably governors and economic development directors that are on the phone with the companies and the talented individuals that you have to get them to relocate. So the stakes have never been higher. It's never been more difficult. But I don't want to, again, take too much time on this, but having a good hard look at those communities that have bucked the trend, that don't have the seeming inherent advantages of a university town or a major industry that is difficult to relocate. Why have they succeeded? Why is every young person west of the Mississippi aware of Bend, Oregon? And why is every young person east of the Mississippi aware of Asheville, North Carolina? Why have they succeeded? What has been the driver there? And so looking at those benchmarks and the success of those, the ability of those non-urban communities like Asheville and Bend, to use just two, and there's dozens of others, what's the common denominator? What are the common denominators there? And we've been looking at that for a long time, and I think there are answers to that question, and it's a good role model for us to follow.
Take about 6 or 7 minutes on this segment, and then I'll throw it open to see if there are questions from the audience here. I'd like to pick up on the idea that, later in the program, we'll be talking about rural resurgence strategies, okay? And central to that question is what all of you folks have referred to, which is the idea that it's not enough for it to just work for Wausau. It's not enough for it to just work for Marathon County. If it's going to work, it also has to work for Portage County, it has to work for other areas, and it has to work for constituencies in those counties. So when we talk about collaboration, and let me be clear, you can't get anywhere without collaboration in this day and age. When we talk about collaboration, are we doing enough to make sure that that question is on the table from the very beginning, as opposed to coming into it at the end? Because there's a real difference between trying to sell something to somebody versus trying to do something with somebody. And so how full are those tables when you first start down the road? How much play do they get for their concerns? How are we doing on consolidation of services? How are we doing on new ways of sharing taxes, et cetera? And let me start again with Dave and Angel.
I'll start off. So I think there's always more room to collaborate in more of a concise fashion. For example, on June 20th, Synergy is hosting the first regional economic development organization and municipality that we've ever had in our region. Isn't that scary to say? The first one we've had? How long have we been around, right? So I think there's always room to collaborate more, and there's room to have those conversations, but I think we still have more work to do. And I know from Synergy's perspective, we want to leverage that regional voice, so we'll be doing more things like this so we can collaborate together, so we know what each other is working on, and how we can either, again, look at our services better and then say this person's doing this, so I'm going to support them in this effort. Synergy's going to focus on this area. I think that we still have more work to do, but when I've traveled to other states and talked about what we have here as collaboration, people are jealous. They're so jealous with how great we all get along, whether or not we always agree on the same things, right? But we still, at the end of the day, can come together to try to solve an issue, and we're envied for that here in Central Wisconsin. So we're very blessed that way.
Build on that point a little bit. So when you look at the Central Wisconsin region, We do not have a big metro to draw from, like a Milwaukee or a Dane County or a Minneapolis, St. Paul. We are in a talent desert. You showed the demographics, Jim did, in terms of what we are looking like today and then another 20, 30 years from now. So we have to act bigger together. And we, to answer your question directly, not even sufficiently enough a collaboration that needs to happen here. Different mindsets have to be established. You need a strong Wausau. You need a strong Merrill. You need a strong Stevens Point. You need a strong Wisconsin Rapids. We have to develop our labor shed, the place that have nearly 400,000 people here right now. So that collaboration that you're talking about, it starts here. She is doing a wonderful job of pulling this together. 2005, by the way, when it started, Synergy. It was formerly a different economic development organization, but we have to we have to tear down the barriers, we have to tear down the walls, the silos, and start thinking big and strategically, collaboratively.
I'll say the one thing that I learned, this is not my quote, I learned it from someone else, but collaboration moves at the speed of trust. So there are times where there's not much trust, and we need to figure out how to solve that in order to have much stronger and effective collaboration.
I think we have some great opportunities to expand our collaborations. I think there's a lot of organizations that are building those. I think the Chamber of Commerce and Dave's leadership and vision has been great in pulling together public, private, higher education. There's so many people, different sectors that sit on the board that talk about what's going to be most beneficial for Central Wisconsin. I think Angel's doing a great job with Synergy. I think there's other organizations like the Central Wisconsin Manufacturers Alliance, the Wisconsin Automotive and Truck Education Association. Organizations like that are trying to bring together and collaborate more. Some of the stuff that we've just done recently with the county on the Regional Forensic Science facility, that there's some funding just dedicated. So I think all those things show some of that collaboration, but I agree with what others have said, that there's opportunities to improve, there's opportunities to build more trust, and there's opportunities to get more done by collaborating more.
All right, let me see, and again, I apologize to our online audience, but I'll ask for questions from the in-person audience. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we talked about diversification. I want to take a part for that word called diversity. And can you take a moment to just talk about the challenges we face up here in central Wisconsin with regard to attracting diverse people to this area? And I don't just mean race, I mean perspectives, cultures, ideas, experiences, things like that, because I think it is a challenge that we have here. How are we doing that? That will help us expand as well and attract.
I'll jump in. The first question I always ask is, are people going to feel welcome? Do they talk like us? Do they look like us? Do they think like we do, right? When I'm thinking about any kind of diversity, do they feel welcome here? And I think we need to do a better job of that. I think that's one of our biggest problems is we're all very friendly, we're all very nice. I go back to the Wisconsin nice thing again. But are we welcoming? Nice is different than welcoming. Welcoming of different ideas, different cultures, different, you name it, whatever is different. So I think that we need to work on what that looks like because it's different for every kind of thought process. And we need to be more welcoming to all of those ideas for us to be more successful.
And I'm going to go in a little bit different direction with diversity, inclusivity, equality of opportunity. That with our region, we have people who live here who have the future values where they really want to have that. We have a generational divide regionally. And if we're going to compete to retain first and attract talent second, we must be in tune with where we are at today, asking hard questions of ourselves, looking in the mirror and addressing those, and then building the culture of inclusivity. Actually, walk the walk. If you're going to talk the talk, walk the walk. Because if we are not doing that, we will not compete to attract and retain talent. I have sounding boards in Madison. My kids. Keep working on it, Dad. You're not there yet. We all have a role in this. It's very important. If we don't excel and do really well at it, we are not going to compete. We will fail.
I think part of the reason we have difficulty with this is that there is not enough recognition of what John's saying and what I've been saying and others have been saying, including my good friend Dennis Winters, who's here all the way from Madison. Thank you, sir. We are at an abyss here, okay? We are running out of road in terms of what happens to public services, what happens to public health, what happens to the well-being of small communities and campuses. It's not enough to have the moral high ground on the question of diversity, whether it's age or gender or ethnic. People need to understand that they have a stake in this game. It is not by accident that we don't have EMTs in God knows how many counties or communities in this state, that the volunteer fire departments are eroding, okay? That there are 20 counties, I believe, in this state where you can't get any OBGYN care, okay? That means somebody's life quality is at risk here. And I think part of what we have to add to this list of things that we need to do in terms of advancing diversity is not to just pat ourselves on the back for saying we're in favor of it, but to help other people understand. Yes, it would be wonderful if they could become you. But in the meantime, I would settle for them deciding to say, yeah, we better get this done, because if we don't, Aunt Sally's not going to be able to get the ambulance when she needs it, or whatever else is going on. So I would add public education to the equation here.
Just a couple of, I don't think Dave would be happy if I wasn't going to be controversial in some regards, but the notion that people look enviously at your collaboration, I'm not so sure that's true. We track Wausau very carefully, and your most prominent moment in the Sun, in the New York Times, was about the divisiveness of Marathon County, and the state is seen as a critical, almost a case study of political divisiveness. And the fact that when you make the front page of the New York Times, it's around the inability of the county to address issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. That needs to be said. It needs to be that honest discussion. And again, on the outward-facing side of things, Greenheck is a terrific company. But if you go to the website, they're not a Marathon County or even a Wausau company. They're a Schofield company. And you'll forgive most people outside of Marathon County, maybe even Wisconsin, for not knowing where Schofield is. And I understand there's a point of pride about them having emerged in Schofield. But again, this is part of what it means to be outward looking, is to recognize that the things that you do have national implications. We had one of our employees leave Portland, Oregon. This is a very important question around diversification as well. And she went to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And the Upper Peninsula of Michigan as a choice over, say, Wausau is based on what? So when you look at a Houghton, Michigan, or a Bend, Oregon, or in Asheville, those are the kinds of, that's the approach I think that needs to be taken to understand why those communities have been able to embrace change to make a compelling value proposition for younger people. And again, education of that generational split is critical. So I know, Dave, you weren't going to be happy if I didn't address some of those things, but I think that they are part and parcel of the hurdles that you face.
It's about the outside looking in to the community. And we not only, we caught attention nationally, but we also caught attention regionally. Companies will make decisions based on what they see happening or not happening in a community.
All right, on that note, we're going to have to move forward here. round of applause for this panel. I think they've been great.